Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in with a day late Hero Academia chapter 224, my thoughts and my impressions. Why are we late? Well, because yesterday my day job was insane and that just threw off my entire schedule. But here we are now. And of course, last week was a bit of a fun week with this with the impression video. I've learned a few things. I talked to a few of you guys in the comments. You might have noticed that some of the comments got repeated. I don't know what happened. My phone was weird, and also if you're hearing my voice is weird, it's probably just tired out from yesterday. I will try to speak normally. Anyway, before getting into the chapter, just gonna say, last week, usually I say I welcome all discussion, but last week kind of hurt a little bit, but it's okay. And I do want to say to Kenju and Christy, thank you for your note. I will do better this week and in the upcoming videos. Any other things I want to say about last week? Well, I guess we could talk a little bit more about it at the end of the video. But I do want to just clarify something with you guys. I realize saying simple may not have been the best thing to say. Although, someone pointed out that straightforward might be the better word. So I want to ask you, do you guys find if I call something simple, or if someone calls something simple in general, do you find it offensive? And in that case, is straightforward the better word to use there? Because my understanding was that simple just meant something that's easy to understand, but I realized straightforward might also apply. Well, no, straightforward also applies there. Anyway, let me know, but we're just going to continue with the video and we can talk about that at the end. Anyway, for chapter 224. Okay, so 224, I think you can argue, comes in like 3 pieces. That is the Shigaraki's group deliberating phase, the Shigaraki group transition phase where they're right in front of the town, and then the Shigaraki group in the mess phase. And the 3 phases give you different details that are pretty interesting. The first phase is pretty interesting because it's the villain characters interacting with each other. And one of the main pieces there is Twice. So Twice, when Twice got introed, or Twice got his specific chapter, the one that he talked about his life, he was the kind of person that gave me the impression that Twice could be flipped to hero side or to just neutral side if he just found a group to belong with. Now, between Twice and Spinner, I still think Spinner has the biggest odds of flipping, but and that's because specifically Twice, and you'll see it in this chapter, he has totally thrown in his lot with the people who have brought him to the villains, and he has thrown in his lots in general with the villains. So I do think it's kind of heartwarming just to see how Twice thinks of Giran, and I do like how hard he was fighting there. It's important to realize like Twice in particular is probably the most sympathetic towards the villains in general. Like he's the most loving of the villains in this group. I think he like legitimately cares about them because of how much direction they give his life. I think he's too far gone into that gratefulness such that I don't think he's gonna come out, and it's cool to see it. Something else that we get in that interaction is that we get to see Shigaraki knowing how to deal with him, and that he takes off his mask. People pointed out that was a kind of dick move, but I think that's worthwhile in of itself. And just showing that Shigaraki understands where to get his way and how to get his way. Now, another thing I'm going to say is that during this little sequence, Shigaraki's idea to use Gigantomachia as the final solution is hilarious. That was the best thing. That's the highlight of the chapter. That was the highlight of the chapter. I never would have thought he would have gone with that. That was great. That was so smart. And then, just thinking he's going to take down Gigantomachia at the end. Yes, I like this. This is totally cool. I like Shigaraki's simple ways of figuring these kind of things out. I'm totally into it. It's cool. Man, I cannot praise Shigaraki enough. Which leads me to a side point. This chapter for me, like, it really seems to just elevate Shigaraki's group and put the Redestro group in a bit of a, like, they're kind of lowering it for me, and it's kind of based on things I was talking about last week, but it's still kind of lowering my expectations for them, because just Shigaraki doesn't have to do much to try and win here, but like those other guys, I feel like we'll talk about that when we come to their part. But yeah, I was really impressed with Shigaraki's thought processes here. Now, other things that we learned in this first bit. First, specifically, we learned that the villain group, according to the Doctor, is stirring the underworld, and this is important for something I'm thinking of for later. Yeah, stirring up the underworld. We find out that Hood was the name of the one that Endeavor and the others, or Endeavor and Hawks, took out. And I think, yeah, I think those are the last two big details that we got in that first little bit. There's also value in pointing out that it's good that Shigaraki realized that Makia isn't invincible but just has high HP. So I really do like it, and I do love that the author is maintaining Shigaraki's video game phrases. So overall, that first bit I think was really strong. The second bit is the approach to the town. By that time, we have Dobby in there, and this is the part that people might say is happening fast, because I saw comments in manga stream saying that yeah, this is occurring relatively fast in terms of the pacing. And because of seeing it, just seeing how the author didn't really spend any more time on the setup for it, really makes me feel like this thing might be over in 8 chapters if I was to estimate. We might get a little bit more, but right now from that's my current prediction. So let's say 232 is where this will end. I think that's enough chapters to do a lot of cool things. Anyway, at that point, the biggest things aside from the characters just kind of interacting, and also this really cool shot of the group getting ready to fight, I think one of my favorite art shots is that we find out that the hero that we saw with Todoroki and Bakugo is actually part of the Liberation Army. Oh my god. And since he's in this different area, because I'm pretty sure the kids weren't in this area, you can assume that the Liberation Army called in their operatives from across the country to come to this town. So that's exceedingly important to keep in mind, because it just gives you a better estimate of how many numbers are in the town right now. Anyway, that part is just really important because it tells you, okay, well, heroes are now involved in this situation. Once we get into the town, though, we meet 2 of the head-ups of the Liberation Army, the politician and Shueisha. So that was interesting. In that bit, we also find out 90% of the population is the army, and then we have the beginning of the all-out brawl, the all-out war, people fighting everywhere. Now, things that are of importance to keep in mind here are the cameras, and then actually, yeah, the cameras and the information that there's a that the town is 90%. And by the end of the chapter, Shigaraki's wiped out 2 people, and Toga is getting set up for a one-on-one potentially with Shueisha. Okay, so there's a lot of details throughout the chapter that we can talk about and see, well, you know, try and get an idea of what's going on here. Let's start with the Liberation Army real quick, because this is the point that I kind of want to make. I think I'm going to withhold judgment until we see how these characters are utilized, because right now I don't think that the characters are living up to their potential. This is a point that I said last time, and I think it's potentially coming true here. The reason here is just I think the authors, if in the worst case scenario, I think the author would argue that their resources are what helped them set up the town. But if that's it, it's kind of a waste that they could not continue using resources beyond this point. That said, we don't know. There's 100,000 people in this town, so very well the next couple of chapters are going to be really, really chaotic. So that's why I'm going to withhold judgment. But I do think it's a bad sign that Shueisha is getting set up for a one-on-one with Toga. It might not happen that way, but it's kind of silly that the head-ups are coming in to fight before expending all 100,000 of their people. You know, it's kind of weird. Like, why do you come in so early when the villains are still fresh if you want to maximize chances for success? I don't agree with that mentality. That said, on the other hand, I am pretty excited for one-on-ones with these characters, because I do want to see what the villains can do in one-on-one situations, or in situations where they're using their abilities more. I think we need that. I think we need to get those quality one-on-one fights that the villains don't have, but the kids get to have. So I'm very, very excited about that, although I'm not a fan of how those fights are being set up. Another thing, and this is just a general point with Hero Academia, there's 100,000 people in this town, potentially, you know, but I don't think numbers matter all that much in Hero Academia, because, like, let's face it, one of the first villain arcs, they dropped the kids literally into nests of villains. Like, there were dozens of villains for each kid to have to contend with, and they all got wiped anyway, right? So when you consider that, I don't think 100,000 is any challenge for the villains, given the precedent that's been set by Hero Academia with one of the first arcs in its story. Do I think it'll be tough? Do I think it'll kind of expand their quirk usage? Yeah, but I'm not really sold on the threat level there. Like 100,000 is a big number, but if the author really wanted to take advantage of that big number, he would have sworn them with 3,000 people all at once instead of just dozens, right? That's where that's what I'm thinking about it. I'm questioning otherwise. Now, continuing on, there's still a lot of things to talk about. In terms of that 100,000 number, the fact that there are heroes there, I think they should have thrown out if they were going to do like little groups at a time, they should have thrown out groups with some heroes in it, because at least the heroes have combat training. That's at least that's what I think would have been a good logical move. We see that there's at least 2 heroes in the town. You know, my thoughts. But speaking of the heroes, there is that question of asking, why are heroes involved with the Liberation Army? Well, I find that answer very easy to understand. Think about D&D. If you guys play a D&D, D&D has 2 axes, specifically the chaotic and lawful axis and the good and evil axis. Someone can be chaotic good or chaotic evil. Someone can be lawful good or lawful evil. I think that's the case that's happening here, because I think Destro's philosophy is a philosophy that anyone can understand, although the way it's executed may be very dangerous. So when it comes to the heroes, I don't find it strange that they could be radicalized with a document that's proclaiming peace, or not proclaiming peace, proclaiming freedom. I think when you have freedom, which is usually seen as a positive attribute, it's easier for people to jump onto it. And in the case of these heroes, like, think about it from a PR perspective. These heroes are told, hey, come join the Liberation Army's crusade. We're gonna wipe out the Villain League, or the League of Villains. And it's like, heroes would jump at that. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is because the Liberation Army chases for freedom as its banner, because freedom and the freedom of liberation of people is its banner, it makes sense that heroes, their morals may not be too compromised depending on where they stand. Freedom is a trait that people could be like, oh yeah, I want to bring that to the common folks so that they could be like us. It's super easy to understand why heroes might be involved with this. It all depends on, we haven't seen negotiations between the different parties, but I could imagine there are some heroes who are more moderate in terms of the rhetoric or in terms of the policies that the Liberation Army wants to do. So that makes sense to me. You guys let me know what you think about that, but I think it's most likely because the philosophy itself is kind of moral neutral. The execution of the philosophy, however, is a problem. We have to remember, in the name of liberating himself, a man was willing to destroy a building with his co-workers in it. That's not a good result of this philosophy, and that's where the problems really begin. And that leads me into the other thing. This town is 90% Liberation Army. And this might be the author giving him a clear path to justifying the amount of carnage that may occur here. Because think about it, if Gigantomachia, if that plan works and Giganto wipes out that whole town by just landing on it, then, well, the author could say, oh, don't feel bad about these people because they were just terrorists. And it's like, you gotta, he's set it up for a clean break for himself. But there are those little questions of, some of these people are civilians that got talked in by a attractive philosophy, right? Like, there is some problem here. Those people got brought in there with the promise of defeating the villains. You gotta remember that. Like, there might be some moral wrinkles here that the author may not address. That said, the villains may not even succeed in actually wiping out the town. Which leads me into another point. If the villains actually wipe out the town, this is going to be a loud event in Hero Academia, because at worst the villains will wipe out the heads of this organization. At worst, I think it's a case of if the villains wipe out the heads and then the people that they got involved with, it's going to be such a massive loss of life. Like 90% at the worst case scenario of a town is destroyed. And not only that, heroes are also destroyed. This is going to elevate the villains so hard if they come out of this with a victory. It's actually pretty scary. This might be legitimately the end of the League of Villains, because they might evolve into something else. Which leads me into another point. We saw there are cameras throughout the town when we first get there. There's a bunch, and at first I didn't think of this, but I remember something One Piece did, and I'm thinking, what if this is being live streamed to the internet, to the dark web, and other organizations, other underground groups, other splinter cells of the Revolutionary Army, sorry, the Liberation Army, are watching this? What if that's what's happening right now? So, in that case, if the League of Villains wins, they could send a giant message to everyone else that they are the guys to follow. And if that's the case, the message about the League of Villains being destroyed makes a lot of sense, because you could say it's like destruction and rising from the ashes is something else. So like right now, because we are in an arc that's about the League of Villains growing, because Shigaraki's in a growth arc, I really do feel like the Liberation Army are just going to be turned into stepping stones for Shigaraki, given the narrative that Hero Academia is doing with the villain group. Like you guys point out that the villains getting to have their one-on-one time training is such a big deal, that's making them different. They are being created as a rival group to the hero group. So since we're in that type of arc, it only makes sense that the villains triumph throughout this and they gain a lot. Like I always remember, the League of Villains started off with a lot of members all at once. I wouldn't be surprised if they return to that height and turn into something else, like the villains conglomerate. But I don't know. I think this arc has set up a lot of factors here. I think that the Liberation Army, if they lose, their downfall is going to be underestimating Shigaraki's drive here and underestimating All For One's pull. I think there's a lot of factors here that could potentially get involved and really make this complicated. So those are the general thoughts I had for this chapter. Oh, one last thing. I wouldn't be surprised if along with Yuantamakia, whoever the informant for Giran is shows up at the end to try and help them. Because I think that the person who feeds Giran information, I don't think the League of Villains knows who that is. I don't think they know who the leak in Yue is. From some things that Shigaraki from some things that Toga said during the summer camp arc, I don't think they know. So I'm, my craziest wild bet is that maybe someone like Mei or someone from the support department of Yue may show up there at the end to give Shigaraki a little bit of a boost. But that theory, I'm still working on it. I need to just flesh it out a bit more. But that's just my crazy thought for the day. And now we're at the end of the video. I'll try to keep this under 2 minutes. For just responding to some of the comments from last week. Some people, when I was pointing out that Hero Academia was a simple story, they pointed out that it has complex characters like Stain and Endeavor in it, and that's like, okay, yeah, that's true. It does have complex characters. And then they pointed out that it covers gray areas, and I said, okay, yeah, that's true as well. That's definitely true. And then they also pointed out that, well, one person in particular pointed out that the Stain event had a fallout to it. Like there was the Stain event, then the reaction to the Stain event, and they used that as a qualification for complexity. And the thing is, like, from my side, I don't really see any of those things as indicators of complexity. I found those to be just indicators of a good story. Complex characters within a story, I don't think by that virtue make a story complex. Because most times the situations that those characters are going to be in are going to be relatively straightforward to understand. And even then, the philosophies only inform you as to why they're doing things in a certain way. For instance, you have Stain, and then you have the situation that Stain was brought up in. That being, Stain was in an alleyway killing or trying to kill a guy. Then Ida showed up. Then Izuku showed up by using detective skills. Then Todoroki showed up by following his phone. That was just one guy versus 3 kids in an alleyway. That's a relatively straightforward situation, although Stain's reasons for being there were a bit nuanced. But that said, on the flip side, you have someone like Shizuki, who is also a complex villain, and you have Shizuki's situation, which was much more elaborate and had much more things that Shizuki had to account for, which I think creates a complex situation. There were more things involved in that. In general, I don't think the characters change the overall flow of a story. At least that's my perspective on that one. In terms of covering gray areas, no, I just think that's realistic. That's more realistic. I don't think that's like a bar for a level of complexity either. At least with the definition of the word that I thought I was using, or I thought was correct. I just find that to be like just more realistic writing. I just find that to be better writing. Although people are right, black and white situations are simplistic. They do simplify things. So that's also a really good point against that. And you know, someone also pointed out to me that complexity and simplicity are relative, such that Hero Academia having gray areas does make it more complex than something like Dragon Ball most times. Like I don't have any problem saying like, yes, Hero Academia is more complex than Dragon Ball, but calling Hero Academia complex in general, especially when like last week, which was specifically in conflict resolution and the approach to conflicts themselves and the sequencing of conflicts, I don't feel good calling Hero Academia complex when there is something like Hunter x Hunter in the same manga. And I don't feel good calling Hero Academia complex in general when something like Death Note existed in the same manga a long while back. Like, yes, these manga are small examples, but they exist. And for the people who are saying that if you don't like this, don't read shonen, I think you misunderstand. I read Black Clover and Fairy Tail, and I enjoy both of those series very much. Like, I'm okay changing my expectations as according to the series. But I also like talking about what I think are possible flaws within a series. And I also like talking about what I think are possible strengths within a series. And I like talking about it on the Hero Academia videos because there's quite a few of you who can defend your points and make me see other points that I may not have considered. So that's why I will continue talking about it in the manner I've been talking about it. And also, because of the example of Hunter x Hunter in general, and because in general shonen covers a wide variety of genres, there is nothing saying that Hero Academia cannot step up at certain points in time. And there's nothing saying that Hero Academia could not step up during this particular arc. That said, I am still concerned about these villains. We need to see the next 3 chapters because, again, I think it's relatively foolish to put out 2 of the high-end people of this thing and not give them more support than what they had in this chapter. So we need to see if the villains dust these people with little effort, it doesn't change the initial fear that the Liberation Army's biggest flaw would have been allowing Shigaraki to be on the same playing field as them. They should never have allowed Shigaraki to be on the same playing field as them if they wanted to secure a proper victory. But someone pointed out they might want to just drum up more support, which is why having the cameras there makes sense. If they think they're going to win, of course you want to document it. Anyway, I'm in a bit of a rush, so I don't know if I covered everything, but just on the note of simplicity and complexity, you know, I think I might have just been using simple wrong. I looked up the definition for complex, and complex means using a lot of many interconnecting parts. I think my standards are just probably too harsh, in which case, you know, my bad. I'll do better in the future. But that's what I wanted to just point out with Hero Academia last week, was that it's straightforward. And the way that conflicts get resolved and the way that some conflicts are dealt with in Hero Academia, like, they are relatively easy to understand or straightforward, with like a few exceptions in terms of the conflict sequencing. And I think character work is different than story work, or like the problems that a character has to overcome during any particular sequence. But that might also be something I'm incorrect on in general. Anyway, enough of that. I rambled too much. It's 25 minutes. Let's call it there. Guys, thanks for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a great day, and leave any comments down below if you want to chat about anything. Cool. Hope you had fun.